Oh, hello. How's it going? You've just caught me in the midst of some thinking. Not much else to do from up here in this picture frame after all. Please, come on in. Welcome to my library. A fine place, isn't it? Though it's only recently come into being, truth be told. Indeed, this entire building just so happens to be brand new construction. The Hideout, they're calling it. A place where the many heroes and villains of this world can meet in peace and plan toward the ritual. Yes, indeed, these are exciting times for the city of New York, a fact that you must know as well as any, right? Ah, I see. Unfamiliar with the ritual, are we? Well, that's a mighty shame, though with all the fantastical happenings these days, it can be tough to keep up. Here, why don't you take a seat? If my vantage up on this wall has one benefit, it's that I've overheard much about those passing through. Allow me to tell you the tale of how all of this came to be. It's hard to believe it's been nearly a full year since Deadlock first entered early access. A game that combines the strategy elements of the MOBA genre with the action and precision of a third-person shooter. It's a game that I'm sure we're all doubtlessly familiar with. Published by Valve, the same company responsible for titles like Half-Life, Counter-Strike, Team Fortress, and of course, Steam, expectations have been high for Deadlock ever since people first became aware of it back in 2024. And this first year of open development certainly hasn't disappointed, taking what began as a fundamentally engaging multiplayer experience with understandably rough edges and elevating it to a much more rounded game, brimming with character to rival the publisher's other long-standing series. And while gameplay changes like the downsizing of the original 4-lane map and numerous item balances have gone a long way to bringing that vision to light, I don't think I'm alone in saying that it's the most recent major update which has really drawn me back in recent times. On August 18th, 2025, one of the largest updates in Deadlock history would release, bringing with it the addition of the Hideout, a completely new hub zone, new map changes and overhauled menus, and of course, 6 new characters that would be released over the course of the coming months in the order voted upon by the community. Needless to say, it's been a great time to be a Deadlock fan, and with so much new life being breathed into the experience, there's a ton to explore, especially when it comes to that ever-growing roster of heroes. And with so many people coming back to Deadlock given the new content, I figured it's time we take another look at what has to be one of the most requested topics on this channel. Today, we'll explore the stories of each and every character this game has to offer, find out why they're here, and learn a bit more about the world of this game in the process. This is the full lore of each and every hero in Deadlock. Attention citizens, breaking news. We interrupt this broadcast to bring you an important announcement from today's video sponsor, Manta Sleep, and their selection of premium sleep masks and accessories. Lightweight, high quality, breathable, all are words that are apt to describe the alluring comfort of every Manta Sleep mask. And with a mission to empower light sleepers to sleep better so they can do more, you can sleep soundly knowing you've got the best in the biz on your side. Listen closely, friends. Regardless of which mask strikes your fancy, rest assured that it'll come stock standard with a host of great features, like 100% blackout to keep those pesky lights away while you slumber, specially made eye cups to keep pressure off the eye during rest, and an infinitely adjustable fit, so comfort is a breeze. But we know what you're thinking. Well, Everberon, which is your favorite mask? And the answer is the Manta Cool, featuring cooling technology for eye and sinus relief, even during the deepest of dreams. These masks are remarkable, astounding, but that's not all. They're also 10% off using my link in the description or code Everberon at checkout. That's code EVERBERON for 10% off your order. So what are you waiting for? Check out their selection today. We once again thank Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video. And now back to your regularly scheduled programming. Before we can understand the lore of Deadlock's individual characters, though, we have to get a feel for the world as a whole. And even though an exhaustive discussion on that topic is somewhat outside the scope of this video, it is something I've spoken of quite extensively in another video in the past. So if you're looking for what is likely to be a more comprehensive view of this world, I'd recommend watching that upload first. But let's do a little bit of a refresher regardless, because a lot of the background is quite pivotal to understanding why our characters are the way they are. The most important thing to understand about the World of Deadlock is that, in most ways, it's ultimately analogous to our own, except with one major difference. In Deadlock, virtually every paranormal phenomenon, from cryptids to ghosts and other figments of the unexplained, are real and verifiable aspects of everyday life. Just like in our world, for most of history, these encounters were regarded as little more than the stuff of legends, but all of that would change in the early 1900s with the appearance of the first maelstrom. The maelstrom was a storm of supernatural origin which would form in the upper atmosphere over New York City, and which is known in Deadlock lore for having catalyzed the widespread awareness of the supernatural among the human population. During the maelstrom, it's said that spirits rose from the dead, extra-dimensional rifts known as astral gates would open around the world, and from this point on, humanity could no longer ignore the existence of her unexplained brethren. It was a rapturous moment for Earth life, to be sure, but even after the storm would dissipate, those astral gates would remain active, including one which had opened in the very heart of Central Park. So, over the coming decades, humanity would, remarkably, begin to forge bonds with the extra-dimensional beings that would emerge, causing New York to rapidly become a melting pot of cultures, both earthly and otherwise. For the better part of 50 years, this is just how life went. In a way, the world had entered a new age of renaissance, as humanity and the paranormal would teach and learn from one another, progressing arts and science at an unprecedented rate, but all the while, something was brewing on the horizon. See, just like an eclipse or the changing of the seasons, it was found that maelstroms occur on a somewhat predictable schedule. Though the one in 1900 may have been the first, whatever had caused their emergence seemed to be here to stay, and it wasn't long before a new maelstrom was predicted to occur sometime around 1950, bringing with it a new surge in mystical energy, and for some, a unique opportunity. Around this time, tales had begun to emerge of a set of beings hailing from the very edges of known reality. Simply called the Patrons, these two entities were in possession of a truly vast body of knowledge and anomalous potential. So much as to make them nearly godlike, with the power to grant virtually any wish to their most devoted followers. The only catch, of course, was that proving oneself worthy of a patron's blessing was by no means an easy task, requiring a complicated seance involving ritual combat and, of course, a volume of magical energy, the likes of which could only be achieved during a maelstrom. So, as you've likely already guessed, it's the performance of this very ritual during the night of the second mystical storm in recorded history that we participate in when playing a round of Deadlock for ourselves. Which brings us to our participants. As we explore the background of each character today, we'll find that most of them have a distinct reason for wanting to partake in the ritual to begin with. Usually, it's the blessing of the patrons themselves that's the goal, but others are more complicated. So, for the rest of this video, let's finally get to know our heroes. And where better to start than with none other than Abrams. Big, bold, and blue, Abrams is unquestionably one of the single most well-known characters in the entire Deadlock roster. Hailing from the plane of Ixia, a world heavily associated with the element of fire, he's got a reserved and calculated attitude fitting of a detective. Which, as it happens, is exactly what he is. As described in his background, hard-hitting, hard-headed, and hard-drinking, Detective Abrams has been a fixture of the New York investigating scene for years. From stolen art to missing persons to ritual murders, Abrams didn't just take any case that came across his desk, he solved them. But it's in the course of his work that he's attained an interest in the ritual, for it was the mystery of the magic tome he carries with him on the battlefield where his detective initiative first became personal. His days of following cheating spouses came to an end the day he opened his office door and found the tome sitting on his desk. No instruction was left for him, save for a brief note scrawled in onyx blood that read, "Don't let them have it." Abrams hasn't figured out where the thing came from, but seeing as his home has been broken into, his office tossed on 3 different occasions, and his car firebombed, he has a vested interest in figuring out what the hell is going on. To this end, Abrams seeks to summon the patrons in order to close the book, both metaphorically and literally, for good. More specifically, he insinuates within in-game dialogue that he wants to have it destroyed, but we get the sense that he still is curious about its origins nevertheless. In spite of his efforts, it seems he hasn't gotten much closer to the truth than when he first set out. Bebop is the creation of a woman by the name of Shelley Fisher, an attendant at a local junkyard whose husband passed away sometime prior to the events of the game. Little is known about the widow nor her deceased partner, but what we do know is that her creation of Bebop seems to have been spurred on not only by a need for laboring hands, but also out of a place of loneliness. It's said that during the day, the widow and her robot would work side by side in the iron yard, and at night listen to jazz, the music itself serving as the inspiration for Bebop's very name. And simple though it was, this routine seems to have brought joy to both of their lives, or at least it did before Shelley turned ill. We don't know the full extent of Bebop's creator's affliction, but judging by her brief appearance in the leaked Deadlock Lady Geist visual novel, which even today is the only first-hand account of her we have, it's thought that whatever the disease is, it's left her consigned to an armchair, completely unable to man the scrapyard. It was this deterioration of Shelley's quality of life that would eventually cause Bebop to go behind his creator's back and begin searching for a cure. Initially, this would lead him to participate in a well-known underground fight club in the city in order to raise enough money to purchase her medicine, but with the ritual on the horizon, it seems his objectives have changed. Now, Bebop intends to use his strength for a different purpose, not just to subdue her illness for now, but to eradicate it for good. One of the newest characters to the Deadlock roster, Billy, is one of the game's more mysterious entities. An otherwise normal man with the head of a goat, no one is exactly sure what drives Billy to do what he does, only that a vaguely punk-oriented motivation persists in the majority of his activities. His backstory likely puts it most eloquently, simply saying, "Billy is a white-hot ball of rage, furious at the very notion of something. Maybe it's the cops, maybe it's magic regulations, maybe it's the service at the gyro place downtown. Not the good one, the other one." Nevertheless, Billy is a very skilled combatant, seemingly able to channel even the most minor of annoyances into real power on the battlefield, making him a turbulent and ultimately unpredictable force for some reason. Though we may never know the specifics of his caprine appearance, it is heavily insinuated that the transformation is somehow intentional, judging by one of his in-game voice lines, and what's more is that it likely comes as a result of his very own eldritch power.
You think you're special because you got eldritch power? Newsflash, buddy. Where do you think the goat head came from?
Like a few of Deadlock's other heroes who we'll talk about later, Calico used to belong to the reputable Baxter Society, a group of skilled combatants who, in the post-Maelstrom era, would take up arms against the more hostile monsters and supernatural entities on Earth. While it's plausible that the Society's efforts weren't universally praised, given the diverse supernatural backgrounds of many New York City residents by this time, their work was certainly well enough known and well appreciated by the majority of citizens. But for Calico, this seemingly wasn't enough. Like so many others, what she truly desired was wealth. And it wasn't long before she discovered a knack for contract killing, which she's since rolled into both a profitable criminal business and a very fearsome reputation. Today she stands as a formidable member of the New York underworld, and with a propensity for both physical and spell-based violence, she's a very deadly encounter, leading her to earn the moniker of the most dangerous woman on the planet. One final, lesser-known aspect of Calico's character, though, is that in spite of her vast criminal enterprise, she's also a mother, known to have a son whose name and origins are regrettably yet to be revealed. He's only ever mentioned in one in-game line from the woman herself, where it seems that the two have something of a tense relationship, though any further information beyond this lies firmly outside of our understanding at this point in time. Another of the newest characters added to the game, the Doorman may well rival characters like Billy in terms of mysteriousness, even though he's also one of the few heroes who we can actually associate with a prominent in-game location. Located just off Broadway, near the middle of town, the Baroness Hotel is a well-known fixture of the map, and it's also here where the Doorman is employed. Unlike his peers, though, he doesn't work out of necessity, but rather for fun. Put simply, the Doorman takes pleasure in observing the follies and tribulations of humankind, and has found that working in the service industry is a great way to do exactly that. But obviously all of that begs a big question. If the Doorman himself isn't human, then what is he? But we actually don't know, and in fact, the more that we look into his purported origins, the more confusing and concerning the answers seem to become. The Doorman's backstory suggests that he's some kind of extra-dimensional being, which should hardly come as a surprise given his power set, able to send unfortunate players to a pocket dimension of his own design. But it's in his description of himself where things get strange.
Reality twists and bends around you. How can this be? Has the Baroness turned on its loyal servant? Or has a fledgling god lost his mind in the face of the patrons?
Yeah, it would seem a rather strong possibility then that the Doorman is in fact a sort of infant patron, which certainly casts some level of suspicion on his participation in the ritual to begin with. I don't think we'll ever know for sure if his motives run deeper than a surface-level interest in humankind, but if nothing else, one thing is clear, and it's that the Doorman is certainly limiting his power of his own volition.
Don't you fools get it? I am the patron you should worry about angering.
The third of our 6 newest characters added to the game, the Drifter, as his appearance would suggest, is a vampire, one who's traveled back and forth across America for generations, feasting on the blood of the innocent in order to remain youthful, all while perusing the country in a seemingly aimless fashion. His backstory states that, unlike most vampires, Drifter doesn't value finery or titles, and has naked contempt for vampiric laws and tradition. His refusal to toe the line has made him a marked man all over the North American baronies, but while viscounts and elders cry for his execution, Drifter continues to do what he pleases. As a vampire, it's not entirely clear exactly how old the Drifter is, nor where he initially hails from, but his accent suggests origins from around Louisiana.
I'll pull him in close to you, Drifter.
Well, aren't you a tough little scrap golem?
And combined with his peculiar tendency of referring to New York City as New Amsterdam, there's an argument to be made that he may actually be older than the United States themselves, with origins going back to at least the 17th century. The Drifter is a peculiar specimen indeed, made all the more so by the fact that, unlike many of the game's other characters, he doesn't seem to partake in the ritual for any other reason than merely the spectacle of it. A truly aimless vagabond predating even the American frontier, who shows no signs of slowing down anytime soon. Professor Dynamo is a character whose origins are deeply entwined with Deadlock's New York as a whole, having long established a name as a reputable scientist, specifically in the area of metaphysics. It's said that he was among the first people to investigate the rift which opened in Central Park following the first Maelstrom. At this point, though, very little was understood about the phenomenon, and resultingly, whether through improper handling, close proximity, or some other form of anomalous happenstance, Dynamo would find himself the victim of a drastic physical alteration. In nearly an instant, his human body was atomized, and in its place was left a ball of sentient energy, a dying star possessing the man's memory and consciousness, but stripping away the rest of his humanity. As a result, the modern Dynamo, though different in physical appearance, maintains his curious sensibilities. No longer a practicing scientist, he's instead moved to teaching at Columbia College, a more reserved and less physically demanding way to pursue knowledge without so much risk. Judging by the fact that he's partaking in the ritual, though, it seems there's something else that drives him as well. likely the restoration of his original physical form and/or a quest for even deeper understanding of the unknown. Let it never be said, though, that Dynamo's condition has slowed him down over the years. In a conversation with Kelvin, Dynamo states that he's been married to his wife Marla for 31 years. And since the astral gate that destroyed his body opened 50 years prior to the events of the game, then that would rather strongly suggest that even without a physical form, Dynamo was able to find love and move on with his life. There certainly is hope for all of us. Another interesting aspect of his character is that Dynamo is, or at least was, for better or worse, associated with Maximilian Fairfax, a almost comedically evil businessman whom the professor describes as complicated at the time of the game. While it wouldn't seem that the two are exactly close in the modern day, they evidently were at some point in time, since we do know that Dynamo was in fact the godfather to Maximilian's eldest child, Aaron Fairfax, who we'll also discuss in more detail a little bit later on. Another character with deep associations to the Baxter Society is Wesley Gray Talon, one of the organization's founding members, who, as his backstory says, spent close to 40 years hunting monsters that preyed on man before finally deciding to find a replacement and lay down his bow. Though this pursuit was obviously important to him, it seems that, like many other career-driven individuals out there, Gray Talon's affiliation with the Baxter Society had always driven a wedge between him and his family. By the time his tenure was over, his son had a family of his own, and realizing that his time was limited, Wesley knew precisely how he was going to make use of his golden years. Retirement suited Wesley. He made up for lost time with his wife. He doted on his grandkids. He cooked dinner for the whole family every Wednesday. He was happy. Then he got the call. The authorities claimed that it was a freak accident, that the fire consumed his son's house before anyone got a chance to escape. But Wesley knew better. His son's wife was an Ixian who could snuff out flame with a thought. If their bodies were found burned, they had to be dead long before there was a fire. The tragic loss of his son, whose name is revealed to be Nathan in a conversation Wesley has with our next character on the list, was more than enough to drive Gray Talon back out of retirement. But this time around, he would find himself pursuing a very different type of monster. Now, you wouldn't be remiss for assuming that Gray Talon's ultimate goal is to use the ritual in order to attain information from the patrons pertaining to the identity of his son's killer. But the fact of the matter is that Wesley already seems to have that information more or less reasoned out on his own, implicating an organization known as the Friends of Humanity in the crime. Comprised of the biological and ideological descendants of the late John Haythorne, this is a group that could most concisely be described as human supremacists of a sort. Those who believe that humanity should hold the sole claim to the earth, and who reject all supernatural entities as inferior peoples. If Wesley is correct, then this would mean that Nathan Gray Talon was likely slain simply for loving an Ixian woman, an assumption which is only bolstered by claims made by one of the patrons.
Haythorne's disciples will answer for their crimes. Together, we will make them suffer in ways unimaginable.
Another of Deadlock's earliest and most recognizable characters, right up there with Abrams, Haze is a government agent with a very secretive organization. The Occult Security and Investigations Commission is a black box government organization that makes the CIA look transparent. It falls on the men, women, and entities of the OSIC to keep the country safe from sinister forces that are beyond the capabilities of local law enforcement. As a member of the notorious Sandman Division, Haze is routinely tasked with infiltrating the dreams of persons of interest to assess their threat level and, if needed, to put them to sleep. Due to her strict government affiliations, basically everything else about Haze is considered classified, and as such, we don't have much to go off of in terms of what she's like as a person, aside from her ability to play the cello, which is mentioned in one offhand conversation, and likewise her affiliation with the ritual is similarly ill understood. The primary assumption, though, is that the OSIC has put her to the task of summoning the patron as a part of an ongoing investigation, though the other conclusion, the idea that a government agency might want for the powers of a god, is undeniably more uncomfortable. Born in the relatively small town of Macomb, Illinois, Holliday is perhaps the first character we've met who expresses overt reluctance at finding herself in the Cursed Apple. Back home, she enjoyed the life of a sheriff, presiding over a peaceful pocket of the country. She didn't want for much, and had things gone differently, she likely never would have left. But when a series of odd murders would take hold back home, it fell to her to bring the perpetrators to justice. Grisly and inhumane, the bodies were found with their rib cages ripped open, their innards picked apart as if by birds. Holliday tracked down the killer, a traveling folk musician that the media dubbed the Troubadour, but when she confronted him, he exploded into a murder of crows and flew away. It was her continued investigation into this paranormal murder that would bring her to New York, where even today, she continues to hunt for answers. Answers that, it seems, Valve actually has some significant plans for. See, Holliday is one of the few characters who we know is going to possess a visual novel, not dissimilar to Lady Geist's referenced before. Very little about these novels exists in the current build of the game, except for the audio portion of the feature, which was data mined, and details the sheriff's continued hunt for the Troubadour before and during the time of the ritual. As a result, we can definitely expect to see more from Holliday as her story continues to unfold. Outside of her continued investigation, though, Holliday is also much less of a loner when compared to a lot of the other ritual participants. It's said that back in Illinois, she had a sibling, a sister who's since passed away due to unknown circumstances. Perhaps the Troubadour was involved, or perhaps not. In addition, due to a one-off in-game voice line, we also know that she's been married multiple times, though the whereabouts of these ex-partners remains unclear. Our second and final Ixian member of the Deadlock cast, by his very nature, Infernus possesses an extreme degree of control over the element of fire. In spite of his characteristic look and powers, however, Infernus wasn't actually born in Ixia, instead being a second-generation immigrant whose parents arrived on Earth before he was born. This is according at least to Yoshi, a developer in the official Deadlock Discord, who also mentions that Grey Talon's daughter-in-law was of similar heritage. It's mentioned that in Infernus's youth, he possessed a real affinity for criminality, with even arson and murder among his list of escapades. But in adulthood, Infernus's primary concern is instead with his career as a bartender at the upscale lounge known as Jezebel's. Adept at both serving drinks and removing the rabble when things get out of hand, he's found a real affinity for his work. But for all of his charm and skill, it's clear that Infernus still wants for something, though even the patrons offer little except nebulous insights into exactly what that something is. Perhaps it's merely a wish for a better life, a new start, or even the quiet dismissal of his criminal past. All of these seem to be plausible answers, but knowing Infernus, his true motivations are probably somewhere in between. Ivy's story, although never explicitly stated, likely begins at the same moment as the Astral Gate which opened in New York. For it was this very outpouring of supernatural energy which first would cause life to flourish within the previously inanimate form of a stone gargoyle, standing idly on a building in East Manhattan. Though her first moments are a bit of a blur, she would gain consciousness only moments before stepping in to protect a young girl by the name of Sofia Arroyo from attackers belonging to a group known as the Mendoza Syndicate, thus earning Ivy honorary Arroyo family status and being raised alongside their children in the Spanish Harlem neighborhood hereafter. Over the course of the following 18 years, Ivy would work diligently to dismantle the Mendozas, but even as she would become known as the savior of Spanish Harlem, she would yearn for a greater purpose. Today, she partakes in the ritual in the service of several simultaneous ends, not only doing so in order to protect the Arroyos, but also presenting her with an opportunity to know her own identity and to decipher what it is she's fit to do next. As mentioned near the beginning of this video, the supernatural facets of the World of Deadlock stem from a total of 7 astral gates positioned at various sites around the world. But even early on, rumors would begin to spread about an 8th gate, located somewhere in the Arctic Circle. These reports have never been officially substantiated, but it was Kelvin who would organize the premier expedition meant to confirm its existence. Though not much is known about the rest of Kelvin's career in the modern day, it's clear that he definitely had credentials for this kind of undertaking. According to a conversation with Mo and Krill, he had already evidently completed an expedition to Ixia at this point, which, as we know, is an entirely different world, and so one would be right to think that adventure on Earth would be a relative piece of cake. Understandably, Kelvin's Arctic expedition was a heavily publicized undertaking, and yet not a single member of that expedition would be heard from again, leaving the people to wonder what could have happened in the northern ice. At least, that was until Kelvin himself would suddenly appear again. A year and a half later, the frozen body of Kelvin was found by a fishing trawler, his corpse clutching a rock etched with glowing runes. The crew chipped away at the ice, looking to get a closer look at the body, and were shocked when Kelvin opened his eyes. They checked his vitals. There was no pulse. They sought to bandage his wounds. There was no blood. And yet, impossibly, Kelvin was alive. Today, he presides in New York, bearing the mysterious stone found alongside him upon his back. And maybe, with a successful completion of the ritual, this once great scientist will be afforded some answers as to just what happened on that northern expedition. In her youth, Lady Zhen was a beautiful young woman, the kind of girl who attracted attention from everyone, on account of both her looks and privileged status. Officially, though, Zhen would only attain the last name Geist after marrying renowned German artist Johann Geist, with whom she would have a son by the name of Walter prior to his death. All things considered, her life was excellent, but as she aged, Geist found it increasingly difficult to grapple with her ailing form. It was seemingly impossible for her to accept that she too wasn't immune to aging. And as a result, shortly after the first maelstrom, she would find herself in a deal with Oathkeeper, a powerful spirit with the ability to restore her youth, but at the cost of blood. A Faustian bargain that Zhen would inevitably accept. From this point forward, Oathkeeper would take up residence in Lady Geist's left arm, secured by a magical seal in order to prevent its voracious appetite from influencing her directly. But as time has gone on, the seal has begun to weaken. Originally, maintenance on Oathkeeper's confines was performed by none other than Geist's own grandson, also named Johann, but as the ages ticked by, and Johann himself would pass away, all while Geist remained as youthful as ever, she was forced to devise a new solution, and thus, the commencing ritual has presented an appealing opportunity. Undoubtedly, the life and legacy of Lady Geist is one of the most robust of any Deadlock hero, largely on account of her struggle with Oathkeeper being the central focus of the very first leaked Deadlock visual novel. Resultingly, her future is perhaps less unsure than most of our other heroes today, but we'll still have to hold out nevertheless to see it come to any official fruition. Jacob Lash is an asshole. Nah, I'm just kidding, although it is true, and yes, this is the only thing said of him in his official backstory. The truth, though, is that Lash is actually a champion pit fighter participating in bouts at the Bear Pit, which is also the same venue that Bebop has been known to attend on certain occasions. Aside from this, basically nothing is known about Lash outside of the fact that both Mo and Krill and the Doorman refer to him as a stevedore, or someone who loads and unloads the cargo at a port. Oh, and let it never be said that Lash doesn't engage in a bit of charity on occasion.
You know it's important to give back. That's why I'm taking 3% of my earnings a day and donating them to Lash Back. It's my charity dedicated to children who kind of suck.
Maggie McGinnis always had a knack for building things. At 4, she was using Lincoln logs to recreate architectural marvels. At 10, she built and rewired a custom light fixture for her parents' anniversary. At 15, she designed a machine that refined the souls of the dead. That last one got her a little more attention than the Lincoln logs. A prolific inventor through and through, McGinnis works as the head of Fairfax Industries' military R&D department, developing weapons and other such technology on behalf of her, honestly, quite shady employer. There's not much else to say about Maggie, truthfully, largely due to the fact that she's far more reclusive and antisocial than a lot of Deadlock's other heroes. She spends her time holed up in the lab and doesn't get around to doing much else. The sole exception being in Lady Geist's visual novel, where she briefly attends a socialite party and quickly expresses just how much she doesn't want to be there. I guess we'll just leave her alone and move on to the next hero. The fourth of our 6 newest characters added to the game, Mina's backstory is likely my personal single favorite of any character in the entire game, so I'm going to read it for you in full. Mina had it all. Rich parents, elite education, and an arranged marriage that would see her ascend from run-of-the-mill upper class to American royalty. She was happy. Then her betrothed was assassinated. Mina wept, not for the life of her fiancé, but for the future that was stolen from her. Why couldn't the killer just wait until after the wedding? Then she'd have the last name she always dreamed of, and no one would even have to pretend to love anyone. It could have been perfect, but life wasn't fair. And so Mina did what she always does when things don't go her way. She told her parents to fix it. Mr. and Mrs. Ha knew that the only way to appease their daughter was to offer her something greater than what she lost, and marrying into one of the world's most lauded families was a tall order to top. They had to think big. They had to think outside the box. They had to promise their daughter immortality. It took a small fortune, but eventually they found a vampire who was willing to turn her. Unsurprisingly, Mina thought the idea of eternal youth and a trust fund was an acceptable plan B, and happily agreed to the proposal. Now a fledgling vampire, Mina has quickly discovered that the clout she held as a human has no weight in vampire high society. And while at first that annoyed her, if there's one thing Mina has a knack for, it's learning the rules so she can subvert them. She will be the Viscount of New York. The other vampires just don't know it yet. Now, while the idea of a wealthy human socialite needing to start from scratch in order to climb the hierarchy of influence in vampire society is honestly a pretty genius origin for a character like this, that's only a portion of what makes Mina so interesting. The other thing that causes her to stand out is just who it was that she was supposed to marry in the first place. Because according to in-game dialogue, Mina's betrothed was none other than Aaron Fairfax, the child of Maximilian Fairfax, Maggie's wealthy defense contractor employer, and yes, the very same Aaron who is Professor Dynamo's godchild. Many of you probably already know that Aaron is also the true identity of another character who we'll talk about later in time, which naturally means they aren't actually dead. So when they and Mina inevitably meet during the course of the ritual, it shouldn't come as any surprise that she definitely has words for her once betrothed.
You ruined my life. I should have been a Fairfax.
One of the many, many varieties of supernatural life that's found a place for itself in the modern climate of New York are a species known as the Gene, a variety of people that are only capable of maintaining a corporeal form for about 48 minutes at a time before needing to rest within some kind of vessel. Of course, this parallels the Jinn of popular fiction, often depicted as spirits presiding within lamps, granting wishes, etc. But as a result of this drawback, we're told that the Jinn of the World of Deadlock often employ humans to help protect and offer them companionship when not in a corporeal state. As revealed in his backstory, Mirage is one such bodyguard. Employed by Jinn Ambassador Nashala Dion, Mirage is in New York on a diplomatic mission. It's the hope of the Jinn that they can negotiate with the US government for a sale of part of Wyoming so that they can build a sovereign nation for their people. For a long time, this was practically all we truly understood about Mirage, and by extension, Nashala. But owing to some in-game conversations, we have some further insights into the way that Mirage actually views his employer.
How do you like working for the Jinn?
Well enough. Sometimes it's frustrating when Nashala makes impulsive, short-sighted decisions.
Such as?
Asking me to trust you.
Oh, you're fun.
Finally, while in New York, Mirage and Nashala are also known to be patrons of the Baroness Hotel, meaning they're likely already to have been acquainted with the Doorman even prior to the ritual. Mo and Krill are a duo of characters both belonging to a group known as the Tunnel Rats, a loose organization that specializes in the trade and movement of illicit products throughout New York by means of a subterranean system of tunnels. If you're wondering who is who, Mo, whose full name is Maurice, is the name of the Mole Man, and Krill is, well, something else. His species is currently unknown, with no clear leads on what exactly he might be. Because of their extensive criminal past, these two have connections all over the Deadlock roster, being express friends with the likes of Pocket and known to frequent the Bear Pits alongside the likes of Lash and Bebop. It's even said that they've done business with the Mendozas, the family that Ivy drove out of Spanish Harlem. Aside from these endeavors though, Mo and Krill are also known hobbyists. Krill is currently writing a memoir, and Mo has a knack for pottery, even expressing a desire to audit a pottery class at Columbia University, where Dynamo teaches. The second to last of our newest heroes, if there's been one constant in Paige's life since her youth, it's been a love for books. The daughter of a dealer of rare and magical texts, Paige's parents placed an emphasis on the value of literature, and while their teaching did indeed foster a love of reading in Paige, the same could not be said of her younger brother Bryce. It's said that Bryce always had a rebellious and standoffish nature, with Paige herself even describing him in-game as a curmudgeon. But this bad behavior would eventually culminate in him being kicked out of the house in Paige's younger years, a phenomenon which we still don't fully understand, and neither does Paige, because as time marches on, her need to know what became of her sibling only festers, to the point of partaking in the ritual merely for the sake of answers. Aside from this, there's not much else to Paige, largely because all of her time is spent simply reading. It's the sole activity she's known to enjoy, even spending time reading books to kindergartners and other youngsters at libraries across New York City. Aside from this, the only other thing we truly know about Paige is that she's a notorious flirt, crushing on no less than 3 men, including Mirage, Shiv, and Victor simultaneously. Paradox is a very interesting case study as a character, not only because we don't know their true identity, but because we don't even know if Paradox is a single character at all. Paradox, an artifact of time, and the name of a notorious thieves guild, one that prides themselves on constructing elaborate heists that target the most untouchable of individuals and institutions. What does Paradox do with the countless artifacts, state secrets, and celebrity paternity tests that they have stolen? Put it on display at pop-up museums so that they can show the world that no one is out of Paradox's reach. Shrouded in mystery, each member of Paradox dons a mask and takes on the organization's name. They're everywhere, they're nowhere, and if they want something, they are inevitable. Though the gang obviously views themselves more as vigilantes than petty criminals, the law tends to disagree. By the time of the game, we even know that at least one ongoing investigation regarding the group is headed, as it happens, by none other than Detective Abrams. Aside from this, though, little else is known about Paradox due to the group's secretive nature. Yep, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time to talk about Pocket, otherwise known as Aaron Fairfax. Eldest child of Maximilian Fairfax and heir to the Fairfax family fortune, Aaron is a character we've already talked about quite a lot, simply due to the fact that their backstory intersects quite often with other members of the Deadlock cast. We've already discussed how they were arranged to be married to Mina, how they have connections to the likes of Mo and Krill, and so on and so forth. But by far the most impactful part of their story is how it is that they're even alive in the first place. Famously, on Aaron's 18th birthday, they were shot and left for dead as part of an elaborate attempt to prevent them from inheriting their father's company. From the outside, everyone believed they were dead, even Mina and her family, as we've already seen. But the truth is that Aaron survived, and has merely been in hiding for the past 5 years, wisely avoiding announcing their own survival in case a repeat attempt on their life should be considered. After all, as in-game conversations would suggest, Aaron openly suspects their own father for having perpetrated the crime. Nowadays, Aaron goes by the name Pocket. It helps to protect their identity and allows for a degree of discretion while traversing the streets of New York. Naturally, like so many others, their participation in the ritual suggests a search for answers. Up to this point, we've seen a handful of criminals interspersed within our colorful cast of characters, but if ever there was an arch-evil to be found in the Deadlock cast, his name would be Seven, and his uncharacteristically lengthy backstory makes that all too apparent. When mystic energy awoke on Earth, the world changed. Anything was possible. But just because anything was possible didn't mean that anything should be possible. And so the government made rules. Laws, a means for U.S. citizens to enjoy the benefits of the supernatural world in safety. But rules and laws are for lesser men, men with limitations, men who were not Seven. There are many rumors about what Seven did to land himself in Lost Whisper, an oubliette for the most dangerous of occultists, but there is no doubt about what happened on the night of his execution. Wards placed by the most powerful ritualists of 7 different nations. Wards designed to not just prevent mystical interference with the execution, but to simultaneously obliterate Seven's soul so that it could never be contacted, resurrected, or otherwise used by someone looking to follow in his footsteps, failed. Onlookers viewed in horror as the strongest mentalist employed by the U.S. Army's head popped like a grape. They screamed as Scotland Yard's premier occult investigator, the one who allegedly captured Seven, crumbled to ash. Seven's body buckled and writhed against his restraints, his skin burning from eldritch electricity, and yet he would not die. He laughed. He laughed as he tore himself free from his bondage. He laughed as his captors cowered in fear. He laughed as he massacred his tormentors. He laughed as he tasted the fresh air that was denied to him for years. And he laughed when he thought about what he was going to do once he reached New York City. Now, with all of this in mind, you might be left wondering just one thing. How did Seven end up imprisoned in this extra-dimensional sepulcher in the first place? And the answer, at least according to him, is as follows.
What did you do to end up in Lost Whisper? I offended small-minded simpletons with fragile egos.
You don't try to obliterate someone's soul just because they offended you.
Your naivete is refreshing, Detective.
Following Grey Talon's departure from the Baxter Society, it was none other than Shiv who would take up the mantle as the group's de facto leader. Boasting a criminal past, his skills in combat take on a rougher, less polished nature, which definitely contrasts the style of his compatriots. But he is ruthlessly efficient at what he does, dispatching monsters in a manner definitely befitting the group's goals. Weirdly, the Sapphire Flame suggests that Shiv's powers may somehow be associated with a separate entity, one referred to simply as the Beast, though admittedly, we know practically nothing about this thing beyond this single interaction. Shiv also displays a prosthetic in place of his right arm, which, although we haven't talked about it yet, is actually a facet he shares with every other Baxter Society-affiliated member in the Deadlock roster. The meaning of this is unclear. Perhaps it points to some as-of-yet unknown hazing ritual, or some other kind of prerequisite condition for entering the organization, but it's worth bringing up, and it'll be interesting to see how this plot point, along with the rest of Shiv's character, is expanded upon in later content. A character with a very different background from anything else we've seen so far, Sinclair is not one being, but rather a pair of souls, 2 ghosts by the names of Henry and Savannah, who have operated out of the same mannequin-esque body since the day a tragic accident took their mortal lives. In life, Henry and Savannah were ultimately little more than high school sweethearts with an affinity for stage magic. They married very shortly after graduation, and knowing that they were meant to be forever, they even went so far as to have their souls eternally bound together through blood magic. A gesture which, while sweet in sentiment, would obviously lead to problems down the line. When an on-stage accident claimed both their lives, no one was sure who to blame. Henry claims Savannah was out of position. Savannah says Henry didn't wait for his cue. But one thing's for sure, since their souls are tied to each other, neither one of them have been able to move on. Now, a bickering pair of ghosts, Henry and Savannah need to work together if they want to have any chance of undoing their eternal union. Victor is the final of the 6 newest heroes added to Deadlock as of recording, and his background is a fitting return to form. The way Victor came to be is very straightforward, and in fact, just one look at him probably tells you most of the story. He was created in the same fashion as Frankenstein's monster, a bulking mass stitched from the body parts of others, and his goal is to discover whose bodies he's made out of and by whom. Due to the fact that Victor is quite literally stitched together, he also experiences chronic pain all over his body, pain which, to Victor's credit, is harnessed effectively for combat, but which he also doesn't seem to be able to subdue in virtually any conventional fashion. In fact, the only thing that's been known to alleviate Victor's pain completely is Viscous, whose healing cube seems to have therapeutic properties even for his necrotized flesh. Aside from the likes of Drifter and perhaps the Doorman, Vindicta may just be the oldest character in Deadlock. Born sometime in the late 1600s, Vindicta was one of the many victims of the Salem witch trials, persecuted by none other than John Haythorne himself, with her spirit only rising again as a direct result of the magical energies introduced to Earth during the first Maelstrom. Given her circumstances, and indeed as her name would suggest, Vindicta is very much focused on revenge. But considering around 200 years have passed since her initial persecution, John Haythorne, the man who put her to death, has been dead for centuries. However, it was Haythorne's very own descendants who, as mentioned earlier, would eventually go on to form the Friends of Humanity, the very same organization that Grey Talon suspects of killing his son. In the modern day, it's these men who Vindicta pursues, aided by her fearsome rifle. And should she succeed in summoning a patron, we can only imagine the horrors she plans to inflict upon them. Viscous is an interesting specimen among the Deadlock cast for 2 particular reasons. First is the fact that, unlike many other characters, he doesn't hail from New York or even the United States. Instead, he's from the Bermuda Triangle, originating from one of the 7 astral gates, with this one being located at the bottom of the ocean. The second thing about him, though, is that he's not some kind of warped human or extraplanar spirit, but instead a humble sea anemone, imbued with ectoplasmic and psychic abilities, which, of course, begs the question of what he could possibly be doing in New York City. Well, as Viscous's background tells us, though the effect that the astral gate had on sea life was generally positive, there were some unfavorable ramifications as well. For one thing, just as was the case in New York, beings from beyond the portal have been known to emerge at the bottom of the ocean. It was actually through this gate that the Loch Ness Monster would first arrive on Earth, who's noted as being benevolent, but the gate would also introduce the sea to what would easily become her most devastating predator, known only as the Adversary. Though the denizens of the deep have been dealing as best they can with this roaming threat ever since the days of the first Maelstrom, the coming of the patrons have presented a direction to permanently remove this nuisance from their domain, and it's Viscous's intent to subdue the Great Terror on behalf of his people for good. Vyper is one of the Deadlock cast's more shady and unknown figures, more or less being your average run-of-the-mill organized criminal, though with the body of a lizard, they have a very nebulous past, which is reflected in their backstory. When it comes to breaking the law, not getting caught is a pretty important part of the job. Vyper never got the memo. Luckily for her, if there's one thing she's better at than being arrested, it's escaping out of jail. Being slippery and unable to be pinned down is pretty much her defining character trait, and it's even reflected in her style of gameplay. It's said that Vyper has done time in every major prison in the tri-state area, and has made a vast array of unsavory friends in the process. Judging by her voice lines, some of the places we know she's served time include Staten Island, Philadelphia, New Jersey, Illinois, and Wisconsin. But ultimately, that's pretty much all we have on this reptilian crook, at least for now, since, by her own admissions, her character is kind of unfinished.
Yeah, I'm a work in progress. Pick me.
So far, most characters we've discussed have demonstrated some kind of internal justification for taking place in the ritual. Some seek vindication, others knowledge, the list goes on. But Warden is an exception. because he isn't motivated to bring about the patron's return, but rather to forestall it. Hailing from a family of militant alchemists, Warden's kin are said to have understood the existence of the supernatural on Earth far before the appearance of the first Maelstrom, and they also knew of the catastrophic effects that could be brought upon the world of the living in the event of a so-called paranormal apocalypse. In other words, they were essentially supernatural preppers, and when the Maelstrom did come, Warden's parents would have him undergo thorough training to protect humanity from the patron's return. What's interesting though is the sheer level of physical and mental fortitude that Warden appears to maintain. Voice lines from the patrons themselves make it clear that his true motivations remain obscure even to them, in spite of their apparent telepathic abilities. What's more though is that although his vehemence toward the patrons would logically signify a similar contempt to other forms of supernatural life, this doesn't actually seem to be the case. In many of his conversations with other characters, he tends to judge off of merit and not along special or paranormal lines, and easily sits among Deadlock's more honorable cast members even in spite of his questionable end goals. Wraith is something of an anomaly in that her written backstory is very short, consisting of a mere 2 sentences at the time of recording, and yet we know a fair bit about her simply on account of other character-based interactions. Officially, all we're told is that Wraith is the cornerstone of the New York gambling scene. Wraith's organization is about as open a secret as it comes. However, thanks to a non-trivial amount of bribes, shakedowns, and blackmail, Wraith knows that she's above the law. And while that's all well and good, the sheer vastness of her money-making operations aren't properly articulated here. For one thing, we know that she hosts bets on the combatants in the bear pits, where Lash and Bebop participate. We also know that she hosts a poker night each week on Sunday, where some other members of the cast have been known to participate, including Mo and Krill, who are both regarded as close friends, co-workers, and confidants, signifying that Wraith's operations likely extend all over New York, and perhaps even beyond. The final character currently present in the Deadlock roster, Yamato, is a Japanese immigrant and the current leader of the notorious Seventh Moon crime family, one of the most powerful gangs in New York. Opting to quite literally bring a sword to a gunfight, she's an extraordinarily fearsome foe, and is certainly regarded as such by a few other members of the Deadlock roster, but it's how she got to the place she is today that's really interesting, a facet of her character which is sometimes missed, considering that her backstory is entirely penned in Japanese, so allow me to read a translated version for you now. Born to criminal royalty, Kaori and her brother Yamato always knew they were destined to run the Seventh Moon after their father's passing. For years, they ran the organization as equals, leading to profit, success, and plans for expansion to the United States. The idea was simple. Kaori would stay in Japan and maintain things at home, while Yamato would travel to America to set up an international presence. Unfortunately for the siblings, this plan didn't sit well with some of their more insecure underlings, who bristled at the idea of being led by Kaori in Japan. The coup was swift and violent. Yamato gave his life in protecting Kaori, but in doing so ensured that she and a handful of loyalists were able to escape Japan for America. When she arrived stateside, the contact her brother was supposed to meet greeted her and her retinue. Unfamiliar with the gender of Japanese names, the man addressed her as Yamato. She thought to correct him, but decided that the best way to keep her brother's memory alive was to take his name and live out his dream. And with that, we finally reached the end of our roster today. Go ahead, give yourself a pat on the back. Now, no matter who walks through these halls, you can say you know their story front to back. I'm proud of you, kid. You've done good. In fact, you're well on your way to having your own painting hung up on this wall for all of eternity. Now, wouldn't that be great? Both of us just hanging out up here on this wall. You gotta listen to me talk forever. It's a dream, a privilege even, and I think you're ready. No, don't back away. Oh, come on. We became such good friends over this last hour and change, huh? Ah, damn it, every time. Man, I always gotta scare them off like that right at the end. Oh well, there's still plenty to learn anyway, so don't you worry, I'll continue to keep an eye on things. Regardless, I hope you found this video to be some fun, and that it's helped you better understand some of Deadlock's enigmatic cast. If you want to see more stuff like it, then please be sure to let me know. But until then, this is Everberon. I'll see you again soon, and have a good one.